We are into lecture number 7 today. We're going to quickly recap what we did in the other class, and then we're going to start off with chapter number 4, Managing Marketing Information to Gain Customer Insight. What did we do in the other lecture? We studied about macro environment of the company. So what factors were there did we study? We studied about demographic environment, and we saw the changing trends that were there in the demographic of the population. What is demographics? It is in terms of okay, so observable characteristics about a population is referred to as demographics of that population, right? So we studied different trends that are there in demographics. So we talked about changing age structure of the population, how in certain countries there are more, there's majority of the population that is young and the rest is old. The case might be reversed in other countries. So you know, the changing demographics offers a lot of opportunities for the businesses. But then we talked about the increasing trend of urbanization, and also the fact that the growth in rural population is increasing every day. Then we talked about changing family structure, how we're moving from the joint family system towards a more nuclear family system here in the subcontinent, Indo-Pak region. But in the West, we talked about how there are other forms of family structures too, where people are divorced, people are single parents, so there are many arrangements that are there in the West. Then we talked about changing role of women, how women are increasingly now taking up jobs, contributing to the contributing income to the household, right? So how the working women are increasing the disposable income of the people, that's what we of the household, that's what we discussed. Then we talked about white collar jobs and its increasing availability, and then we talked about increasing diversity, right? So since the travel is much better, the borders have almost, we're talking about a globalized world, so there are no more borders that we are talking about. So the world is more like a melting pot. Not just America, but overall the world is becoming a melting pot where people from diverse backgrounds are coming together, they're working together, and they're formulating a whole new culture, which is a globalized sort of a culture, right? Then we were talking about economic environment. What is economic environment? Economic environment consists of consumers' purchasing power and spending patterns. How does that affect business? Because the purchasing power would lead to demand, and demand would lead to, in turn, profit. So economic environment is extremely important. We talked about two types of economies, subsistence economies and industrial economies. Subsistence economies are economies that consume what they produce, right? So they do not interact much with the outer world. Whereas industrial economy is an economy where there's trade, where there's business, where there's exchange of goods and services. So it's a capitalist form of sort of an economy where it talks about richer markets. Then we talked about natural environment, how natural environment affect businesses, what are the changing trends in natural environment. Then we talked about the shortages in the raw material, we talked about depleting oil reserves. We talked about, what else did we talk about? Cutting of the trees. We talked about the billion tree project of the current government. Then we talked about increasing population. Then we talked about how government might intervene in making sure that the environment is not deteriorated to a point where the human survival becomes difficult. Then we talked about environmental sustainability, and we talked about making strategies by thinking long term, how the strategies would impact the nature in the long run. So for a good company, you should think about not just the short run gains of your company, but the long term benefits or the long-term impact of your strategies. Then we talked about political environment, how laws, rules and regulation might affect your company, right? Then we talked about technological environment, how technological environment is changing rapidly and how it's affecting the way we do business in today's world. Then we talked about cultural environment, we talked about values, perceptions and behaviors. And then we talked about views on responding to this changing macro environment. So we essentially talked, when we talked about macro environment, we talked about the fact that it's not in much control of the organization in the short run. In long term you might have some control over it, but in short run you don't have much of a control. So how do you respond to such an environment? You either take a proactive action whereby you foresee and you steer your company's direction where the environment is taking it to. So you would want to capitalize on any changing trends that are there in the environment. You may have a reactive approach whereby the trend has changed, the environment has changed, and now you're going to react to it. Or simply you would not do much and you would not take much of an action and you would simply consider it as a macro environment factor. So this is how you respond to the environment. Now coming down to today's topic. Now today's topic talks about managing marketing information to gain customer insight, right? So what is marketing information, or what is information? Do you know how much data we generate every day? A lot? Can somebody give me a number of how much data we generate every day? What? Unchi bolo. Trillion GBs? Okay. Anyone else? How much data we generate every day? 10 million? More than trillion? Well, the amount is 2.5 quintillion. Right? More than trillion, yeah, right. So 2.5 quintillion. How many, do you know how many zeros are there in quintillion?
A lot. More than trillion.
Huh? More than trillion? Salia. Anybody else?
12.
12?
16. 28.
There are 18 zeros in quintillion. So this is the amount of data you generate every day. See how enormous the amount of data is that you generate every day in this world? It is huge, right? And since the data is huge, dealing with it also requires special softwares, special skills, right? And the term that we use these days to deal with such enormous amounts of data is called big data. Quintillion bytes. Right? So we're talking about big data. What is big data? Bada data? Very right. The term used is big data. Big data talks about dealing with extremely large data sets. They may be structured, they may be unstructured. Okay? So what's structured data? Organized data. So your spreadsheet, your Excel sheets, this is all structured data. The tweets that you make, the Facebook statuses, this is all unstructured data. So big data includes both the structured data and the unstructured data. And this huge amount of data, when you analyze it, when you try to find out the trends in that data, that is where businesses want to capitalize on, right? And that's what we're going to talk today. What we're going to talk today is how to get useful information out of the data. Because the data itself is useless unless and until you make or you extract patterns out of it, right? So that's what we're going to study today. We're going to study how to use marketing information to gain competitive advantage. Now the first term that we're going to talk about today is customer insights. Customer insights. Now customer insights are fresh marketing information based understanding of customers and the marketplace that become the basis for creating customer value, engagement and relationships. So what is customer insight? So you have the data, you analyze it, you got the patterns, and out of that useful marketing information you tend to offer value to your customer, and you want to form bonds with the customer. You want to form relationship with that customer. So that fresh information that you got out of the raw data that you had, that is customer insight, right? And the customer insight would serve basis for the value that you offer, the relationship that you build with the customer, and how you engage the customer into buying your product and into forming relationship with you. That is customer insight, right? Now customer insight is very difficult to obtain for the simple reason that the customer would not tell you, or he would not want to let you know why he bought the product. Not because of the fact that he doesn't want to. He might want to communicate why he buys the product, but he might not be able to tell you why that is so, because of the latent motives, right? So you never buy products, or you almost never buy products for their functional benefits always, right? You buy the products for their hedonic benefits, right? So what's the difference between functional benefit and hedonic benefit? Functional benefit is the function that the product produces, right? The pen writes is its functional benefit. If it's a Parker, that's a hedonic benefit. That's a fashion statement that I'm trying to make. See, Parker is an expensive pen, right? So that's the hedonic benefit. I'm trying to make a fashion statement. I'm trying to tell you that I have money in my pocket, right? So I am displaying my wealth out of this pen. That's the hedonic consumption aspect of this pen, right? So you do not always consume product for their functional benefit, but for their hedonic benefit as well. So when you buy a product for the hedonic benefit, you sometimes are not able to tell the prospective interviewer who's trying to unearth why you bought the product. The customer is not able to tell the person interviewing him that why he bought the product. That's because he cannot communicate the hedonic benefit that he's trying to seek from the product, right? So for instance, if I question this gentleman why you bought iPhone, right? So I would have plenty of questions. What would I do? I would keep questioning him unless and until I've found the latent motive of his purchase. Now this is a deep questioning based on laddering technique. So I would question him, he would answer me back. Based on his answer, I would question him again. And this process would continue unless and until I feel that I have found the actual motive of him buying iPhone, right? So that's the latent motive. So customer does not always know why he bought the product unless and until you question him deeply, right? And it is difficult, it is time consuming, it is expensive to unearth the latent motives of purchase. It requires proper a psychologist who would properly question the customers, which is not always possible. So getting customer insights firstly is difficult for the fact that customers do not always respond well, and they're not able to tell you their need, in a way that you would want them to tell, right? So the first problem with customer insight is it is difficult to obtain for the simple reasons that they're not that obvious. Now, for marketing information, you just don't need information. You need better information, quality information, and you need to put it in the right way. Now, companies are using customer insight groups to find out why and how people are changing in their needs and wants. So companies are forming customer insight teams, right? So now customer insight team would be a team that would comprise of people from all functional areas. So somebody from marketing department would come, somebody from finance would come, somebody from purchase would come. So all these people would come together and they would form a customer insight team. What would this team do? It would gather information from different resources. So what could be the resource? It could be the data within the company, the data from outside the company, and the data from marketing research. So the three basic information sources that the customer insight team would employ. And the customer insight team would then use these three resources to create superior value for the customer.
Where does the data collected online come in?
Sorry?
The review that you collect online, does it come in the, outside of the market or inside your company?
Depends. Sometimes, you have scanner that goes into the internal data, right? But, if you're searching for somebody out from the outside the organization, so first, let's say you're searching the competitor, that would fall under market data. Okay? So the internal data is inside data that the company generates itself. It has in its database. Now coming down to managing marketing information, now for a good decision making, there are 3 R's that are important in information. What are those 3 R's? You might have studied this before. What are the 3 R's? The right information at the right time in the right format. Right? So you need the right information at the right time in the right format. If you have these 3, you can make good decision, informed decision. Now coming down to the management of the information, there is a system called MIS. What is MIS? Marketing Information System. So Marketing Information System talks about the procedures and the people who are dedicated to assessing the information needs, developing the needed information, and helping decision makers use that information. So it's a 3-step process. What's the 3-step process of MIS? You firstly gather the information needs. That's the first step. How would you gather the information needs? How would you gather the information needs? So somebody who is seeking the information, you would go to that manager, you would ask them what sort of information do you need, right? So they would tell you, this is the information that we need. Since you're the expert, you would tell that, the information would not be available in this format, it would be available in this format. Would that be useful for you? So you would question the manager and try to find out the actual need of the manager at that point in time. So sometimes managers are ignorant, they don't know what sort of information would be best suited for their decision making. So as an MIS expert, you need to tell the manager that this is the information, the exact information that might help you get to the right decision, right? So the first step is assessing the informational needs of the manager. Once you're done with that, now you know exactly what the need is. Then you start searching for the resources. So where can you get the needed information? As we talked earlier, the 3 sources of information. The first source is inside the company, that is your internal data. Then outside the company, and then marketing research, right? So you would employ these three sources to get the data, right? Now MIS is not just important for the company, it's equally important for the supplier, it's equally important for the distributor, right? It's generating information, useful information that can be used by the supplier, by the distributor, by the retailer even, right? So MIS is important for everybody in your value delivery network, right? What's your value delivery network? What's your value delivery network? Your value delivery network includes all the companies that help you deliver the value that you've promised. So value delivery network includes all the companies that would come together and they would deliver the value that you've promised. So when we're talking about MIS, we're essentially talking about we're talking about giving information to not just the company but to the companies that would help you deliver the value that you've promised. Now, what is the characteristic of a good marketing information system? What do you think should be the characteristic of a good MIS?
Good, reliable information.
Reliable information, okay. Accurate.
It should be very easy to access for everyone, like all of the line of managers should give.
Okay. Anybody else? On-time information. So all this is right. But on a bigger scope, what we're trying to see here is the cost-benefit analysis, right? So what's the cost of getting the data and what is the benefit of the data? Now MIS should be able to balance the both. If the cost of getting data is extremely, if the data is extremely expensive and the benefit that you would reap out of it is not that good or now is not in comparison to the amount of cost that you've incurred, then that means your MIS has failed, right? So need to balance between the cost and the benefit that you would get from a certain data that you're seeking, right? So you need to understand what MIS can offer and what is the user's need. You need to balance between both, right? So a characteristic of a good MIS is that it can balance between what is needed and what is feasible to be delivered, right? Now coming down to sources of information. Now we said the three sources of information. The first source is internal data. Okay? What is the first source of marketing information? Internal data. So what is internal data? Internal data are all the databases that are already existing, are collections of consumer market information obtained from data sources within the company's network. So taking his question, if the questionnaire was filled for the very first time, it might fall in marketing research. But now since it has become a part of the company's overall repository, now it becomes internal data, right? So internal data would include what? Information, what would that include? Your purchases, very right. Anybody else? So every time you make a transaction, it would keep a record, right? It would have record of demographics, who's buying the product, right? And your psychographics, what sort of lifestyle you might have. So you choose a certain types of product, it helps the marketer identify the sort of lifestyle that you have. So if you own a Ferrari, if you have a membership to a very expensive club, it tells a lot about your lifestyle, right? Your network, your lifestyle, right? So lifestyle is what? What is lifestyle? Huh? Standard of living. Anybody else? What is lifestyle? Okay. Okay. Anybody else? Okay. Lifestyle talks about how you spend your time and your money. Right? And your company. Okay. We'll take that. We'll take that. Quiet. Shh, quiet. Shh, quiet. So lifestyle talks about the amount of money that you have in pocket and how you spend your money and your time, right? So you have a lot of money in your pocket, but you choose to stay at home, watch a good movie, have a home theater, enjoy yourself at home. That is your lifestyle. That is an introvert sort of a lifestyle that you lead. You have a lot of money in your pocket, you take a trip to Dubai, Thailand, wherever you want to go, right? So that is having the same amount of money, quiet, but having a very different lifestyle, right? So lifestyle talks about how you spend your time and your income, right? So two people may have the same amount of money in their pocket, but yet they might lead very different lifestyles, right? So what were we talking about? Huh? So your internal databases have information regarding the purchases that you've made, the transactions you've made, your buying behavior, your lifestyle, your psychographics, your demographics. So all this information is included in your internal databases, right? Why is it important? And let's put it this way. What is the advantage of internal databases? It's very cheap. The first, easily accessible and very inexpensive, right? So the data is there. All you need to do is use it, right? So there's no additional cost as such of getting the data. Okay? Maybe analysis would cost you a little money, but acquiring the data would be inexpensive, right? So it is one of the best sources of information that the managers could use to make good decisions, good timely decisions, right? And these also help you deliver superior value. So for instance, if you check into a very expensive hotel, you go abroad for vacations, you check into, let's say, Ritz-Carlton, right? Carlton mein jaake ठहरते हैं. First time, you offer a certain type of chocolate for your room, right? The chocolate comes in your room, you have it, enjoy yourself, come back. The next time you go, वही chocolate आपके कमरे में पहले से मौजूद होगी. That is through their MIS. They know what do you like. So you ordered some special flowers. The same flowers would be there before you arrive. That is delighting your customer. All you need to ensure in internal databases is that it needs to be in right form. So we talked about 3 R's. 3 R's were? Right information, right time, and in the right format. So you can get the timely information. So 1 R is resolved. The other R is right information and right form. So that's what you need to ensure in internal databases. Now coming down to the second source, that is competitive marketing intelligence. So what is competitive marketing intelligence? Competitive marketing intelligence is a systematic collection and analysis of publicly available information about consumers, competitors, and developments in the marketing environment, right? So competitive marketing analysis talks about analyzing what is publicly available. So, information about your consumers. So for instance, there's a census and you get new information about the overall population of Pakistan. Publicly available data, right? You can get it. So it is competitive marketing intelligence. Your competitor, let's say Unilever, published their financial reports. Publicly available data. Procter & Gamble takes a look into it, how the company is doing. That is competitive marketing intelligence. What else? You expect or you foresee there's a change in the financial policy of the country. You see some opportunities coming up. Publicly available data, right? So all this is publicly available data that you utilize to provide information and to satisfy the informational needs of the company. Now there's a scenario given of how Unilever, I think it was Unilever, Procter & Gamble, who looked into dumpster for the strategies that the other company was making. कौन सी company थी? I think it was Unilever. So their marketing intelligence team, they looked into dustbins to find out where the Procter & Gamble, Procter & Gamble looked into dustbins of Unilever's company, and they tried to find out if they could find something useful information, probably some documentation that they might have thrown to get insights into what the company would be doing in the future. The marketing research talks about systematic design, collection, analysis, and reporting of data relevant to a specific marketing situation facing an organization. So marketing research is a more active form of research, whereby you would have a proper plan of research. You would define the problem, you would define its objectives, you would collect data, you would analyze the data, interpret it, and then report the findings. So it is a more active form of marketing information gathering, right? So in marketing research, what would you do? You would define the problem, the first and the foremost step of marketing research. So defining the problem and research objective. Now when you're defining the problem, there are three types of studies that you can undertake, right? The very basic three forms of studies. The first type of study is called the exploratory study. So you've started the research, you've defined the problem, and based on that problem, you would have either exploratory study, you would have a descriptive study, or a causal research. So what would exploratory research look like? An exploratory research is done when you're trying to understand a phenomena for the very first time. So you're trying to explore the phenomena. The phenomena has not been studied before. So you're trying to find out how counterfeit products would work in space. First attempt, never done before. So that is exploratory. You're trying to explore what has never been explored, right? So once it has been explored, you go to defining or describing a phenomena. You've explored the phenomena, right? Now you might, let's say the second research that you might take would be to describe the phenomena. So when the description of phenomena is the goal of your research, it comes under descriptive research, right? And the third type of research is causal. Now you've described it, the phenomena has already been described. Now you want to test your hypothesis, right? So testing the hypothesis would come under causal research, right? So, for instance, smoking causes cancer. Okay, that is the H1, and H0 would be smoking does not cause cancer. So you would want to test these hypotheses. So when you're studying, these hypotheses, that forms under causal research. So to exemplify, let's start over with exploratory research. So the first time people were studying what causes cancer, that was exploratory research. Further research tried to describe how cancer might be caused by, smoking, right? So, it damages the cell, there's mutation in the cell, could be gazillion reasons how it could take place. I don't know, I'm not a bioscientist. So, descriptive research hogi wo. What would be hypothesis then? Smoking does cause cancer, it does not cause cancer. That would be hypothesis, right? So these are the three forms of research that you might conduct. Questions on this? Now coming down, that's the first step of your marketing research process. So marketing research process is a 4-step process. The first step was you define the problem and the research objective. So based on the type of study that you undertake, आपके objectives उसी लिहाज से form होंगे. So your objective would be based on the type of study that you're doing, right? So if it's a descriptive study, your objectives would be to describe, what impacted what and how did that happen, right? So these are the sort of objectives that you might have. If it's a causal study, then hypothesis. Now coming down to the second step of your research process that talks about developing the research plan for collecting information, right? So once you've defined the problem, then you make a research plan. Now what is included in a research plan? Now firstly the problem that you've identified before. Based on that problem, you've defined the research objectives, you would report these in the research plan. The third element that you would report in your research plan would be information that is needed, right? So what sort of information is required to answer or to meet the objectives that you've set forth, right? Then how the results would help the management and the budget. You take all this information and then you get approval from the concerned department who would approve the budget for your marketing research. Now marketing research costs a lot of money. Okay, your R&D costs a lot of money. So for that, you need to tell the management that this is the benefit that you would get out of this research plan that has been formulated. And this is how we're going to go about it. And that's the amount of money that the organization would incur if this study has to go forward. Once the research plan has been approved, only then you can move forward. Now talking about the information sources, the two broad categories of information sources. The first source is called the secondary data. And the second is primary data. What is secondary data? That is already there. The data that is already available in the market. So your census could be, you could employ census, वहाँ का से data उठाएं, that is secondary data that is there. You pick data from the internal database of your company, that is secondary data. So secondary data is information that already exists somewhere and it was collected for some other purpose maybe, right? So that is secondary data. Primary data is the information that you collect for the current problem, right? So to satisfy or to understand the current problem, what data that you collected, that is primary data. So for instance, you get questionnaires filled from your sample, that is primary data. That data has been generated for the very first time. If somebody else uses that data, that would be secondary for him, but for you it would be primary data. Now what are the advantages of secondary data? You don't have to work for it, it is already there, right? So you can quickly obtain it. Getting data is a time-taking process, right? So if that data is already available, that means secondary data is quickly available, right? Then it is low in cost, right? So imagine a situation where you have to go to 20 different institutes, get the data filled, analyze it. It costs a lot of money, right? On the other hand, if it's available, then good enough. You can use that data. But what could be the disadvantage of secondary data?
There will be जो essential use है that would probably have been made in the past. उससे वो you could not make the best use out of it.
Okay, very right. Okay, very right. Anybody else?
time के साथ जो conditions भी change होती हैं.
Excellent, very right. So all this is right, right? The data might not be relevant, right? The data might not be relevant since it has been collected for some other study, so it was designed for that study. So it might not be as relevant as you would want it to be. So the first problem would be relevancy of the data. The second would be accuracy of the data, right? So as the times change, so does the data, right? So data needs to change with changing times. So if the data is not updated, that could be a problem. So accuracy of the data would be questionable. Impartiality of the data, again, questionable, right? So you take the census data, you might question that data. Okay? Many people do question the census data. Sometimes it has political reasons why the data might not be impartial, right? So there could be plenty of reasons why secondary data might not work for you, and you might want to get primary data. Now, we would not be able to finish primary data collection, so we would continue this in the next lecture. With this, we've come to the end of the lecture.